and goddess, President Ronald Reagan, my hero. Is this heaven?
Oh, not just heaven, Ruckus. White heaven. You see, there are many different types of people, Ruckus. So God created many separate but, well, for the most part, equal heavens.
You don't say.
White heaven is for decent, good, God-fearing Christians who just happen to, well, hate everyone and everything relating to black people. That means no Muhammad Ali, no hip-hop music, and no fucking Jesse Jackson.
What about Whoopi Goldberg?
Nope.
Oh, this is heaven.
Turns out that God really doesn't have that much of a problem with racism. He doesn't even remember slavery, except in February. Personally, I hate black people, Ruckus. That's why I did everything I could to make their lives miserable. Crack? Me. AIDS? Me. Reaganomics? Come on, I'm in the name. And God has rewarded me. Know why?
'Cause 2 niggers and 2 quarters don't add up to $1?
Well, that. And because God loves white people. And if you teach everyone on earth to love the white man, you too can join us in white heaven.
Praise white God.
And you know, Christy, something happened a long time ago in Haiti, and people might not want to talk about it. They were under the heel of the French. You know, Napoleon III and whatever. And they got together and swore a pact to the devil. They said, we will serve you if you'll get us free from the French. True story. And so the devil said, okay, it's a deal. And they kicked the French out. You know, the Haitians revolted and got themselves free. But ever since, they have been cursed by one thing after the other, desperately poor. That island of Hispaniola is one island. It's cut down the middle. On the one side is Haiti, on the other side is the Dominican Republic. Dominican Republic is prosperous, healthy, full of resorts, etc. Haiti is in desperate poverty. Same islands. They need to have, and we need to pray for them, a great turning to God. And out of this tragedy, I'm optimistic something good may come. But right now, we're helping the suffering people, and the suffering is unimaginable.
Absolutely.
Thank you, white Jesus.
As the Mormons were trying to change their place in American life, the country itself was changing. The social and political upheavals of the 1960s put new pressures on the church, especially over its stance on race.
I think the most damning statement came from one of the presidents of the church, the third president of the church, John Taylor. Basically, he said that the reason that blacks had been allowed to come through the flood of Noah, was so that Satan would have representation upon the earth. That black folks were here to represent Satan, and to have a balance against white folks who are here to represent Jesus Christ, the Savior. How do you damn a people more than to say that their existence upon the earth is to represent Satan?
The most controversial thing in the church was the church's position on giving priesthood authority to blacks, and the church's refusal to do that. I say blacks rather than African Americans because it applied throughout the world.
Now, Mormon priesthood is really a universal office for male Mormons. It's their equivalent of bar mitzvah. It's something that everybody normally would undergo. If you do not hold the priesthood, you can never hold any office of church authority. It also would affect your eternal state. And so what you had really was a very serious disability visited upon Mormons of African descent.
The Mormons had ambitions to be a worldwide church, but their only missionaries on the African continent were in white South Africa, none in black Africa. But then in the early 1960s, a copy of the Book of Mormon appeared in Ghana and Nigeria. A few people read it and were converted instantly. They founded their own version of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
And I read the Book of Mormon. I was moved by the power of the Holy Ghost to believe that it was a sound and a true testimony. I started from street to street, from town to town, from house to house, spreading the message.
They started to write the leaders in Salt Lake for instructions. Over the next frustrating 20 years, they would implore them to send missionaries so that they could be baptized.
And they kept writing to Salt Lake City. They want the missionaries to come and baptize this group of people they are getting. They want Salt Lake to come and show them how to form the church properly. But the church couldn't send missionaries to Ghana to baptize them because of the ban on the priesthood for blacks.
Later into the 1970s, you now have a new president, Spencer Kimball, and you have new forces at work. Most of these are internal. There was also the injunction that had existed for decades, take the gospel to all the world. There wasn't an asterisk at the end of it saying, oh, by the way, you can exclude Black Africa. This weighed on Spencer Kimball. All of those things, I think, had a cumulative effect. The 1st of June, 1978, Spencer Kimball, his two counselors, and the Quorum of the 12 Apostles met in the temple. They engaged in group prayer, and it was described as a Pentecostal experience.
One described it as though there were the tongues of flame, as are talked about in Acts. Another said it was like a rushing of wind for him.
I was there. There was something of a Pentecostal spirit. But on the other hand, it was peaceful, quiet, not a cataclysmic thing in any sense. It was just a feeling that came over all of us. And we knew that it was the right thing at the right time and that we should proceed.
President Kimball announced that God had heard their prayers and had revealed that all male members of the church may be ordained to the priesthood without regard to race or color.
What happened in 1978 was that this burden was lifted from black Mormons. More importantly, a huge burden was lifted from Mormonism because it was rid of theological racism. This enabled the church, of course, to reach out more effectively to blacks. It made the church fully acceptable after the American society had undergone this tremendous civil rights revolution. It really was the moment for the modernization of the Mormon church.
Thank you, white Jesus.
I wish I was in Dixie. Away, away, way down south in Dixie. Bring the niggas with the banjos. Send in the clowns.
Oh, I wish I was in the land of come. Those times there are not forgotten. Look away, look away, look away, Dixieland.
According to police, Dedman, with 2 teenage girls as his passengers, drove to a local McDonald's, meeting up with the rest of the group. There, according to witnesses interviewed by police, he said, "I ran that nigger over."
He was not remorseful. He was laughing about the killing.
Thank you, white Jesus.
Context of White Supremacy. Justice and Gus T Renegade in for another broadcast, hopefully to share constructive information on the system of white supremacy. Thank you everybody for tuning into the program. I hope it is a constructive investment of your time and energy. Today's date, Friday, May 25th, 2012, so I have been told. We will be back tomorrow. That would be Saturday, May 26th at 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. The compensatory call-in. Looking forward to hearing from non-white people, exchange views, concepts, information on the system of racism, white supremacy. We'll catch up on some of the latest news and information that has transpired in the last 7 days or so. Also, we want to take some of that time to address the anti-blackness. I know Pam and we were talking about that on the program earlier in the week, and just looking at some of the ways that people see that manifested in their own behavior, ways that they see it manifested in non-white people that they're around on a regular basis. But that'll be tomorrow evening, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Definitely tune in if you all think it would be a constructive investment of your Saturday evening. With that said, we will get started for the program. Again, we'll encourage folks to chime in. Hopefully people have been reading Dr. Marimba Ani's standout publication, YURUGU, an African-centered critique of European cultural thought and behavior. Very important text. Lots of great information. And I don't want it to just be me reading. It's supposed to be a book club type broadcast, so people chiming in who've been reading the material with their thoughts. We're doing pages 100 through 150. If you haven't been participating in the study sessions thus far, we're still not quite far enough into the book that you would be left behind. You should be able to catch up without too much effort at this point. We're only up to page 150. I will say that the pace, we're going to be picking up the pace a little bit in terms of the amount of reading. I have acknowledged consistently, I do think it's a challenging book. Perhaps not for all, but I definitely think if you are not accustomed to reading, if you don't read more challenging material, if you tend to read a lot of fiction, a lot of maybe magazines, things of that nature, this will probably challenge you a lot more. It's not the easiest read, but I definitely think it can be done. You'll have the study session to help out. She has done interviews and what have you that are available online, so you have a lot of study aids to help you if you have any confusion. But I definitely think we can pick up the pace just a smidgen. We're going to take baby steps. We will increase to 60 pages for next week, so that would put us at page for next Friday being pages 150 through 210. We'll see if we can increase, and I definitely want to hear from folks who've been participating, because I assert that I think about the first 100 pages or so, it's kind of like biking uphill, a little tough, a lot of energy, but once you get to the top, you can coast a little bit. And I think with this book, I think for me, it started with chapter 2, the whole white Jesus thing. When I read this book the first time, I was a lot more confused, but I had already kind of deactivated to some degree that white Jesus chip. And so I think once you hit chapter 2, if you understand the concepts and the terms a little bit more, and she starts talking about the way that religion has been used as a weapon, should be downhill. So hopefully people will let me know if they find it to be the case for them, that it gets a little easier, you're a little more comfortable with the material about 150 pages in. So hopefully it won't be too much bother to read a little more for these study sessions, and we'll get done sooner. It won't take us, the entire year to read the book. All right, that's it. Before we get into chapter 2, we did have a few pages that were left from chapter 1, which is Udumawazo, the cultural structuring of thought. And again, just the world view, the racist world view, how racist man, racist woman, racist child think about the world, the ideology that they share with one another, their offspring, to help them dominate non-white people. And I think importantly, she asserts also the world view that they transfer to all of their victims, which makes it easier for them to terrorize and dominate us worldwide. I think that is one of the main assertions that she makes. I know I've heard her say that in some of the interviews that she has done. One of the big problems with us black people, non-white people, is that we have the Udumawazo of racist man, racist woman. That's why we can't solve a lot of our problems, why we have such a high level of mental illness. So we had just, I think, like eight pages from the first chapter in this section, reading from 100 to 150. Got a few pages left over, so I will kind of close us out on chapter 1, some of the things that I thought were important. This is at the bottom of 105. If folks out there have the book in front of them, bottom of 105. Okay, she writes, the Asili seed of the culture prefigures, then dictates the development of structures, institutions, arrangements that facilitate the achievement of power over other, meaning non-white people. The forms that are created within the European cultural experience can then be understood as mechanisms of control in the pursuit of power. That is what they all have in common. That is the key to their cultural explanation. The ideological base of the culture is the will to power. The Udumawazo, or culturally structured thought, reorders the universe into relationships that prepare it for the illusion of control. Separation must come first. The Asili forces its own self-realization through the cognitive structure of the Udumawazo in the following manner. Dichotomization. All realities are split into two parts. This begins with the separation of self from other, and is followed by the separation of the self into various dichotomies: reason, emotion, mind, body, intellect, nature. The process continues until the universe is composed of disparate entities. Oppositional, confrontational, antagonistic relationships. I would also add terroristic, trifling, and tacky. The self knows itself because it is placed in opposition to other, which includes the natural and affective part of the self. This self-awareness is the origin of European consciousness. Other, that which is perceived to be different from the self, is threatening. Therefore, establishing an antagonistic relationship between all entities that are different. This presents a principle of confrontational relationships in all realities. Indeed, cognition itself is made possible through confrontation. Hierarchical segmentation. The original splitting and separating mental process assigns qualitatively different, unequal value to the opposing realities of the dichotomies and a stratification of value to all realities within a given set or category. This process of valuation and devaluation is accompanied by that of segmentation and compartmentalization of independently derived entities. The effect is to eliminate the possibility of organic or sympathetic relationship, thereby establishing grounds for the dominance of the superior form or phenomenon over that which is perceived to be inferior. The power relationship, abstracted from the larger whole. These opposing realities can never be perceived as either complementary or interdependent. Analytical, non-synthetic thought. The tendency to split and segment makes the European comfortable with the analytical modality in which realities are torn apart in order to be quote-unquote known. This is an essential process within all cognitive systems on one level of understanding. But since interrelationship discourages the hierarchical thought patterns necessary for confrontation, control, and power, it becomes impossible within the parameters of the European Udumawazo to comprehend the whole, especially as a cosmic, i.e. spiritual reality. Culturally, this tendency inhibits the movement to a higher, more synthesizing level of understanding. It is on the level of synthesis that opposition would be resolved, and given the fundamental premise of the cognitive system, there would no longer be any basis for knowledge, power over other. Objectification. With these characteristics of the Udumawazo, an autonomous self has been created. This autonomous self is gradually identified with pure thought. The conceptualization of pure thought is made possible by a cognitive emphasis on absolutism and abstractification. The self as emotionless mind creates the proper objects of knowledge through the act of controlling that which is inferior to it in a phenomenal sense. In this sense, everything that is quote-unquote other than the thinking self is objectified and is therefore capable of being controlled by that self. As long as the knowing self is careful to remain effectively detached. Therefore, through the mode of objectification, knowledge becomes a mechanism that facilitates power over other. Absolutist abstractification. This also mandates the universalization as well as the reification of truths. This universalization is not to be confused with the inductive search for authentic principles of a cosmic reality that is discouraged by the limited analytical and segmenting mentality. It is instead a universalism dictated by the need to use epistemology as a power tool and as a mechanism of control. Very important point. I think we touched on last week how this was going to be this is going to be a recurring theme. One of the callers, I don't remember his name, maybe he didn't even say his name, it was a male. He called in last program and he was talking about that theme of universality, and I think he just wanted to share a bit more on that. And I said this is going to be a reoccurring concept throughout this book. White people saying that everyone has to think the same way that we think. Major theme of chapter 2, proselytizing. Everyone has to be on the same page that we are in all areas of people activity. And if you do not think the way that we do, if you do not do things the way we say they should be done, you're ignorant, you're primitive, you're stupid, pseudoscientific bullshit. Key theme. Rationalism and scientism. Extreme rationalism is not reasonableness. Quite the opposite. It is the attempt to explain all of reality as though it had been created by the European mind for the purposes of control. It is the belief that everything can be known through objectification and that the resulting presentation of reality is an accurate picture of the world. If all of reality can be explained in this way, then we as thinking beings have control over everything. Intense rationalism is the ultimate experience of control for the European mind. Ideologically, it justifies the control of the European self over others. Scientism is the merger of religion and rationality. Here, the European God becomes the great scientist, and the rationalist pursuit is the criterion of moral behavior. The need to experience control creates a scientistic udumawazo in which predictability and rationality helped to defend the knowing self against any possible threat from the unknown. Intuitive knowledge is devalued and mistrusted since it is only possible through cosmic self-awareness. It does not guarantee control. It does not help to create the illusion of power over other. The intuitive modality is not uncomfortable with mystery. Authoritative literate mode. You'll hear much more about this in Chapter 2. Authoritative literate mode. The written symbol becomes authoritative utterance, enabling the European mind to further objectify reality as it universalizes European control. Reductionist symbols set in a non-symbolic lineal modality help to further alienate the knowing self from its authentically affective environment. More control, more power. Conceptual lineality further secularizes the axiological aspects of the culture, thereby linking it as well to the process of objectification. Desacralization. This is a necessary byproduct. I actually want to stop because I feel like that might have lost some people. That's what I mean when I will say confidently, this is not the easiest book to read. I understand that. No problem. You get your dictionary, you look things up as you need. I do that too. I get my dictionary and boop, 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 look things up. I'll just go back. That paragraph where she's talking about the authoritative literate mode, just in my view, to kind of One second. All right. That paragraph, the authoritative literate mode, just if I was to paraphrase, meaning writing dominates. It has more value if it's written down. Contracts and things of that nature, saying that these other groups of people, non-white people, that they're primitive and stupid because they don't have any sort of written history of what they've done, their accomplishments. If you remember the white guy from Save the White People, when he was saying you all didn't have any sort of alphabet, you didn't have any sort of writing system, so that's evidence that you all are dumb and stupid. That's exactly what we're talking about. Because it's written down, because we have a record of this, because we have it on paper, that means that this is more legitimate than if you are just saying this or you think this happened. That is in my view, a calling card of racist man, racist woman, having some sort of written documentation as though that is more valid than anything someone can say, someone could prove, having it written down. And the older it is, the better. That, put that in quotes, the older it is, the quote-unquote better it is, the more authoritative it is, right? Calling card of white people, in my view. Moving forward. Desacralization. This is a necessary byproduct of all of the characteristics of the European udumawazo, as nature is alienated and objectified and approached with a quantifying mentality that views the universe as material reality only to be acted upon by superior mind. The characteristics outlined all issue from and result in the illusion of despiritualized universe. European power is the negation of spirit, just as European control is threatened by the recognition of spirit. All of these characteristics, when understood ideologically, that is, in terms of the nature of the European asili, yield the possibility of power and create the illusion of control. The pursuit of power is the nature of the European asili. The Udumawazo is one manifestation of the asili. It is created to assist in the realization of the asili. What remains to be demonstrated is the way in which these characteristics encourage the development of a technical order and imperialistic behavior towards other cultures. All right, sorry about that. Sorry about that. All right. We must explain how the Udumawazo couples with the Udumaroho energy force to support ideological thrust, asili, of the culture. The quest for dominance. The asili makes each aspect of the Udumawazo political in its use application. Every action motivated by the Udumaroho, both defensive and both defensive and aggressive. The assumption of a confrontational reality. We have identified the asili and source of the culture. It is a seed that once planted dictates the logic of cultural development. In the chapters to come, we will use this concept to explicate the relationship between the dominant modes of the culture, following the path along which the logos of the asili leads. That is the end of chapter 1. Hopefully, as I said, I think things start to go downhill. And even if it's not quite downhill yet, it should be leveling off. We should not be going uphill anymore. Should be solid. If you understand the concepts and what she's laid out, bang, everything else should make a lot more sense. It should get easier as we roll. If this was just me, put a hand up, let me know, give your thoughts. All right, moving forward. Chapter 2. Chapter 2 titled Religion and Ideology. I think for me, I will tell you, time is right and exact. By the time I read this book, I already knew who Ayi Kwei Armah was. And if you've been listening to the Cows for a while, you have heard me shamelessly praise Mr. Armah. He's one of my favorite authors. He writes a lot about racism, white supremacy. He was born in the area of the world known as Ghana. He's a professor on the continent. One of the most important books that I read, 2000 Seasons, when I got, I think, about to chapter 2, and I saw that she was quoting Armah to kick off most of her chapters. I think for me, that was a big part of why things started to go downhill, meaning becoming much easier to grasp, because bang, this kind of sets the tone for the chapter. We talk about setting the table for how you should be thinking and what are the main things that you should get from a chapter. When I started seeing Armah kick off every chapter, and I think most of the quotes that she takes, he's written a lot of different books, but most of the quotes I think come from 2000 Seasons. We'll see as we go. That's one of my top 5 favorite books of all time. I would encourage any non-white person in the world to read that book. It will definitely help you to deactivate the white chip, and for sure help you get rid of that whole white Jesus contamination. Ayi Kwei Armah, AYIKWEIARMAH. I will just read his chapter, or his paragraph, which he uses to kick off chapter 2, Religion and Ideology. He writes, "There was a third white destroyer, a missionary who wanted to replace all knowledge of our way with fables even our children laughed at. We told the white missionary we had such fables too, but kept them for entertainment of those yet growing up. Fables of gods and devils and a supreme being above everything. We told him we knew soft minds needed such illusions, but that when any mind grew among us to adulthood, it grew beyond these fables and came to understand that there is indeed a great force in the world, a force spiritual and able to shape the physical universe. But that force is not something cut off, not something separate from ourselves. It is an energy in us, strongest in our working, breathing, thinking together as one people, weakest when we are scattered, confused, broken into individual, unconnected fragments. Ayi Kwei Armah, I would bet few bucks. That is from 2000 Seasons. I remember it. It's been a while since I've read it, but it had a huge impact. It's not even very long. That's another book I would say is not very easy to read. I had to break it into small chunks. I think I couldn't read more than maybe 20-30 pages a day, and then I had to stop and marinate on what I read. But it's not very long. I'm not sure it's 200 pages. It's not very long. Even breaking it up, it didn't take very long to read. I cannot recommend it enough. 2000 Seasons, Ayi Kwei Armah. Alrighty. For religion and ideology, in my view, just keeping in mind, I think Neely Fuller Jr., he says it best when he says the strongest religion on the planet is the religion of white supremacy, and that people don't think of it in those terms, but that's what it is. That's how it operates, and that they will, racist man, racist woman, racist child, that they will say that they're Christian or Buddhist or Hindu or Taoist or anything. But what they're really doing is practicing the religion of white supremacy. If you have that in mind, this will make total sense as you move. Anyway, if you've been listening to the C.O.W.S, you should be going downhill. Should be very easy to get through this chapter and understand what Dr. Ani is talking about. This is on page 110. If one looks for a sense of the supernatural, the sacred, or the extraordinary in European culture, undoubtedly the only area of experience that approaches the quote-unquote religious in this sense is that of quote-unquote science. It is only what is considered to be science and scientific method that is regarded with the awe and humility that in other cultures represents the religious attitude. Scientism, as such, is not the focus of the immediate discussion, but rather the institutionalized set of ideas and practices that Europeans refer to as quote-unquote religion. Scientism will enter the discussion only as it functions normatively to provide the models or paradigms of European theology. And this will come up again. She talks about this in terms of how they don't really have a spiritual practice. What they have that best or comes closest to that would be their regard for science and the scientist. I will flip. This is on page 115. Okay, about halfway down, I guess, on 115. I guess this would be third paragraph on 115, still in Religion and Ideology, Chapter 2. Havelock's observation on the developmental relationship between the written media or literate mode and objectification as a dominant or preferred epistemological mode can be used to understand the uniqueness of the European Judeo-Christian religious tradition. Religion, to be superior and worthy of the civilized, had to be knowledge, quote unquote, and have the nature of the eternal truth of logic. Its written codification helped to give it this character, and so became to Europeans evidence of true religion. a student in my African civilization course vehemently protested that Christian belief was superior because it was quote-unquote documented. Where else but in the European mind would it seem so compelling that the self be separated from the religious object in order to achieve a proper religious statement? It could instead be argued from a different perspective that it is the very point at which the individual self and the experience of the other defy distinction that a sense of the religious is born. But for Europeans, even this experience has to be understood rationally, which ultimately robs them of the ability to recognize it. Very important. If I had to paraphrase that, I would say white people have an inability to conceive of the universe in a holistic manner, meaning the planets, the universe, everything is all connected. The universe can be known through yourself, and you can be known through observing the universe and seeing yourself as being a part of all of this, all of the people, the planets, everything, the animals, everything that's happening in the universe. Not being able to see things in that manner and having to view yourself as being separate, disconnected from everything. To have some sort of quote-unquote objective, distant scientific observation, as though you are looking down on whatever it is that you're studying, this quote-unquote other, looking down and studying, that is how you come to understand, relate to something. That is the white way of viewing the universe scientifically, quote-unquote, which she says is the closest thing that they have to a religious practice, right? If that makes sense. And again, this is compensatory. The best person to break all this down would be Dr. Ayi. Hopefully we can get her on the program to make sure I'm giving an accurate representation of what she has to say in YURUGU. Moving forward, this is on page 117. And she talks about, this is subtitled, same chapter, Religion and Ideology, subtitled The Judaic Heritage. Actually, this goes from 117. I'm just letting people know so you can be prepared in terms of how much reading. This is from 117. This is from 117 to 119. 117 to 119. If folks want to be prepared for the reading. I guess before I even get to that, I'll make sure that I acknowledge the sound clips at the beginning that relate to this chapter specifically, because that's the bulk of the section we're focused on today with regards to religion. The Boondocks, obviously, the White Heaven bit with Uncle Ruckus, which is what is designed to happen to black people, non-white people, under the system of white terrorism, white supremacy worldwide. The second sound clip talking about the quote-unquote Mormon religion, which is just the religion of white supremacy. Very blatant. We talked about that before. We had Dr. Scott on the program, black person who married a white person, participated in the quote-unquote Mormon religion, and he has written about and talked extensively about his own experiences with racism, being out in Utah around all these quote-unquote Mormons, racist men, racist women. We also had the sound clip with Pat Robertson. He was on the 700 Club saying that the black people in Haiti, that they were being punished, that God was punishing them with that earthquake back in 2010 because they had made a pact with the devil to get the French white people at the time, French racist men, racist women, off their neck in revolting against them. I said this on national television. You had hundreds of thousands of black people dying in terrible conditions, their children being stolen by racist man and racist woman. There's terrible things happening, and this is his commentary. This is God made this happen. These people are being punished. Just, I think, right in line with what she's saying. The strongest religion on the planet, the religion of white supremacy, white people at all times looking to be terroristic and dominate non-white people, and They are ordained to do this. God has given us the right to do this. This is the way the planet is supposed to be. All right. So this is going to go from 117 to 119. This is second paragraph on 117. Judaism is much more than a religion, as that term came to be used in the European experience. It is a political and cultural ideology. It has within it the germ of a model for social organization designed for the energetic development of technological efficiency. It is the prelude to a cultural configuration that emphasizes that aspect of the human experience. The characteristics that can be identified within this tradition combine to give the culture of the early Hebrews the particular socio-technological direction that later became a definitive component of the Western European tradition. The Judaic tradition is associated with a cultural tool that is generally termed codification in relation to the social norms, sanctioned behavior, and religion of the Hebrew people. The term codification, however, properly refers to the systematic arrangement and preservation of certain aspects of culture. All cultures possess methods and media, songs, mythology, art, poetry, ritual, that act to standardize in this way. Therefore, all peoples, quote unquote, codify what they consider to be the valuable and necessary facts of their tradition. It is specifically the use of the medium of the written word in this respect that in European parlance is connoted by the term codification, and that in the minds of Europeans is so reverently associated with their cultural heritage. Through the use of the written word, culture becomes recorded, and this recording becomes an impressively cumulative activity, giving the impression that the culture itself is more cumulative and therefore within the logic of this same value system, evolutionarily superior to cultures that codify their traditions through other media. I'll stop right there, give my little quick paraphrase. If you think about the number of times that you see a quote-unquote expert, which generally is a white person, right, under these conditions, the number of times that you see a quote-unquote expert give an interview or opinion on something, particularly if they're on television, and it'll be staged so that they're in a library. It may not even be in a library. A large bookshelf or a bookcase, right? Might not even be real books. It might be green screen where they just, stand in front of the screen and we'll just make it seem like there are a mountain of books behind you. That, I think, goes exactly to what she's saying, right? Give the impression that there's just a ton of written material supporting what this person has to say. This person has got to be an expert because they've written a book. They've got to be an expert because they've got all these books around them that justify what they, or at least repeat what it is that they've said, and because of that, they are more legitimate, more valid, more credible than anything anyone else says who does not have a book or is not giving an interview with a mountain of books behind them. I think that's exactly what she's talking about, specifically with the emphasis on written word, text, right? Continuing, this is still on 117. Writing, of course, first developed neither in the context of Judaism nor any other part of the European cultural tradition, so that it is not merely the presence, knowledge, or possibility of this medium that is critical in identifying the peculiarity of the European configuration. More subtly, it is the way in which this tool figures in the culture in question that is important here. In the European tradition, writing takes on the features of a dominant value within the belief system of the group. It is not merely a tool among tools. The medium of the written word is so valued that it can itself impart value, much as religion does, to the entire fabric of traditional cultures. Without the written media, how could the European God, quote unquote, and all the pronouns referring to him be capitalized? Question mark. A primary European expression of reverence. The same is true of Plato's forms. The act of writing and its importance become ideological in function. They become a frame of reference that acts to determine and in many respects limit the mode of perception of those caught up in this structure of values. We have already pointed to some of the implications of lineality in the European Udumawazo as it relates to the written media. Just taking a quick pause. I can continue reading. I am disgruntled. Things typically on the plantation do not go as planned. I was all excited to be back broadcasting outside. I hadn't been able to broadcast outside in about a week. And I hadn't even been able to sit outside comfortably in about a week because it's been raining and terrible weather. It's been in the 40s here. I mean, that, in my view, is just disgraceful. It's almost June and it's still in the low 40s. Don't even be thinking like 48, 49, like 42, 40, like not even 10 degrees from freezing. How can that be? And it's almost June. That is just, in my view, disgraceful. I thought there would be a reprieve from that today, as the forecast for, I think 10 days ago, right? The forecast said it was supposed to be 70 degrees. 70 degrees today, 70 degrees tomorrow. I was all excited, like, yes, I'm just hold on. You can just have a little bit of patience. It'll be 70 degrees. You can go back outside, get some sunshine. It'll be great. I'm all excited. Today comes, it's sunny. As soon as I wake up, that's the first thing I do. I look outside. Oh, it's sunny. The sun is out. Thank God. I'm all excited. I'm going to be able to go outside and get some sunshine. It's sunny all day. I'm not even outside at first. I'm like, I'm going to save it. I'm going to wait till this afternoon when it's a little bit warmer, a nice warm part of the day. Then I'll go outside. I'll even be able to do the program. I go outside at around 3. It is gorgeous. Best weather I've seen in at least a week. So excited. Like, oh, I can't wait. I'm going to have my t-shirt on, get some sun. Oh, get some vitamin D. I go outside, literally, as soon as I go outside to get ready to do the program, it's like clouds descended from everywhere. Just dark black clouds, the symbolism in the language. Black clouds come in from everywhere. And I'm just like, are you joking? You have got to be kidding. And the sun immediately disappeared, had to relocate. It almost started raining on me as soon as I got ready. Like literally, almost as I began the program, rain started to come down. So just a horrific turn of events. I don't want to get too dramatic about it in the scheme of things where you have non-white people dying and being killed worldwide. Not the worst thing that could possibly happen, but certainly not pleasant for me and caused a bit of scrambling as I had to rapidly relocate to a drier climate for the broadcast, moving where I did not want to be for the program. I thought I was going to be able to stretch out and enjoy the weather outside, but that was not to be. At any rate, give me 2 seconds. I will slide one more time and then pick back up on 118. I'll give out the number as I relocate, see if I'm skilled enough that I can do that. Let's see here. The sun has returned. Thank goodness. The sun has returned. Okay. Might be able to hang outside for a bit now. I will test and see. I will not hold my breath, but we'll see if we can remain outside and enjoy the sunshine. Weather in Seattle, man, this is like purgatory. I can tell anybody, if you're thinking about coming to Seattle, come for a visit. Make sure you wait until like July. That's when they have the best weather out in these parts. I would say July. That's when it's most likely that you'll actually see the sun. You'll get a lot of it. You'll be able to really enjoy the weather. If you come anytime outside of July, you're taking your own risk. It could be anything. It could be anything. I would expect rain. Prepare for rain, wind, gray skies, that sort of thing. All right. The number is 760-569-7676, and the code is 564943#. Number again, 760-569-7676, and the code is 564943#. Picking back up on 118. And please raise a hand if something is not clear, if it does not make sense, something that I'm saying. If it's a passage, I know I'm reading a lot. If it doesn't make sense, raise a hand. Hang on, Gus, I didn't quite understand that passage. Or if you read something, I'm not going to obviously read the entire section that we're reading for today, but if you read something that didn't make sense, definitely get a hand up and we'll try our best to see if we can get clarification. Okay, picking back up on 118. The point to be made here is the way in which this valued activity related to other Western tendencies of the European asili, already prefaced in earlier Judaic culture. When written expression becomes a dominant value, words become binding through writing, and values are perceived as laws. Laws preserved through written codification are more impressive to the European mind than mere quote-unquote values. This circular process helps to maintain order in lieu of those mechanisms that would be binding in other cultures. Written laws become the mark of European religion. The literate mode helped to impart the illusion of historicity and therefore a quote-unquote universal truth. As I said, that's going to come up a lot, that universal idea. Written codification is necessary for the development and growth of a certain kind of ideology and a qualitatively distinct style of organization, not necessarily more complex, but in many ways more oppressive to the human spirit, as it forces human activity to be increasingly technologically oriented. The Kemites, Egyptians, non-white people, possessed a system that allowed them to keep written records thousands of years before the Hebrews. They also had a larger and more technologically accomplished culture, and for these reasons, Kemet might first appear to be the ethnological precursor to crystallization of European culture. But Kemetic civilization is sacredly based, and its religion more cosmic, mythic, and symbolic in intent. The mathematical, astrological, astronomical, and philosophical knowledge of the Kemites, even the material colossus that was Kemet, were products of a total conception of the universe as spirit. It is for this reason that Kemet still remains a puzzle to the European mind. The African apprehension of the universe as cosmic harmony simply represents a philosophic approach that defies the European world view. What is relevant here is the difference between the use of written codification and its value place in Kemetic and Hebraic culture. Respectively, what was written in the Book of the Coming Forth by Day, the Book of the Dead, was to be buried within the dead and was intended for their benefit and use. But the philosophical essence of spiritual knowledge, which included science as well as theology, was represented by the priest schools or mystery systems and could only be transmitted orally, reserved for a small circle of initiates. Written expression of these teachings was prohibited for two reasons. They were secret and they were sacred. Writing, on the other hand, imparts two things to its content. Number one, it publicizes, reveals, and spreads its content in a way that other pre-electronic media cannot. One never commits to writing that which one truly wishes to remain private. It makes public its content in this way. The written media profanes, initiates into this system of spiritual wisdom, pledged themselves to secrecy. This was interpreted to mean the prohibition of writing down what they had learned. It was only when individual Greek, Persian, and Minoan students, Socrates and Plato no doubt among them, gained access to Egyptian schools and political control of Egyptian civilization that acts of sacrilege were performed. Acts that in the nascent European ideological framework of ancient Greece were compelling. As early as this in the European experience, the culturally exploitative use of the written media seems to have been recognized and utilized, and the European interpretation of these priestly Kemetic teachings became much of Greek philosophy through the many strokes of many, many pens, as George James explained. In this view, we could almost say that classical European culture began with an act of profanation and plagiarism. How profoundly different was Hebrew conception of meaning from the Kemetic and other non-European conceptions. It was a conception that promoted the arduous activity of recording in writing the religious laws of its people, and thereby gave birth to the idea of the quote-unquote scriptures. Within the European context, culture and law are reified, and therefore through writing are deified. Religion has greater force, is quote-unquote truer, because it is codified in writing. Starting with other presuppositions, however, it would seem that it is only as laws become alienated from the human spirit that conformity to them requires that they be put on paper. This is at the bottom of page 119. Very important passage, in my opinion, and again tying back to that aspect of the only real quote-unquote religion that white people have, the religion of white supremacy. The closest thing that you could say that comes to a quote-unquote religion would be science. Obsessive, I would say. Obsessive writing down, it's got to be written, and it's got to be written in this specific manner, and that is what makes it valid. That is what makes it scientific, serious, something that everyone around the world, a way that they should think, a way that they should behave, a way that they should write material. Very important, and again, this will come up consistently, I think, in her work as we move through this chapter and the rest of the book. Let's see. Okay, this is on page 120. This is subtitled Monotheistic Ideal: The Incipient European Cultural Chauvinism. This is at the top of 120, and I think this goes right back. I think she's even going to use the term. I don't know if I'm not going to read the whole thing. I'm just going to read two of the paragraphs on page 120, but this goes back to that concept of universalism. Everyone is supposed to be thinking, acting, speaking, behaving, believing in the way that white people say. That we have to go out and get all of the non-white people that we intend to terrorize and dominate. We got to get them to think, speak, and act like us, and aspire to behave, think, function like us. Very important value set for racist man, racist woman. I would say a key aspect of why they have dominated us for so long. This is on page 120. Page 120. Our concern here is with quote-unquote monotheism as a culturally expressed value in these terms. The counterpart of the quote-unquote good-bad dichotomy of European value becomes that of monotheism, polytheism. For Europeans, the one God idea, like written codification, represents a socio-technological advance along the evolutionary spectrum. Judaism proclaims this ideal. It is recognized as a Jewish concept in spite of Anaktin. For in Judaism it becomes hardened ideology. The statement of this ideal expresses the European Udumu Rojo dramatically. I'm skipping down, next paragraph. This characterization of Hebrew theology is an accurate statement of the European self-image. One type of person, one culture, whose task it is to save all people. This vision of a larger world in relation to a special culture, one's own, contains the germ of universalism. The critical ingredient of this theme appears, a theme that we shall follow in this study as it develops both historically and synchronically through the various aspects of European culture. The Judaic statement also laid the groundwork for the secularization of history. By interpreting history as the unfolding of divine law, profane lineal time, historicity, rather than hantu, sacred time and space, became the sanctioning force. I will stop at that paragraph. Very important in my view, and she will bring this idea up again. That one sentence, this vision of a larger world in relation to a special culture, this one type of person, one culture that everyone should accept, aspire to emulate and reproduce. And you see that even today, going around the world. People should westernize the underdeveloped world. They should be like us. They should change, run their businesses, run their families, run every aspect of people activity in the manner that white people say. You see that worldwide. I've seen it my entire life. Skipping forward, still in chapter 2. And again, I encourage folks, raise a hand if something is not clear, if it doesn't make sense, something that I'm reading is not clear. If you've read, as I said, I'm not going to obviously be able to read the entire section of what we are focused on. But if you read something in the section that's not clear, dial in, put a hand up, and let us know. We'll see. We'll do our best if we can clear it up. Keep an eye on the switchboard. Oh, I do see a hand. Person who called in, I suspect this could be via Brooklyn. Did you have a question, comment?
Greetings. I just thought that was really important, that that other section you were reading that was defining the end of chapter 1, talking about what was it? One specific thing, seeing how like the written rules kind of made the people kind of separate themselves from having those rules like just be innate, kind of. I don't know.
I think I remember just reading it recently. I think it was one of the more recent pages that I read. I would agree. I think I'd heard a similar quote before. I remember reading it the first time that I read this book, and I thought that was really important. But just as people become more alienated from one another, from nature, the universe, from spirituality, I think she used the term cosmology. As people become more disconnected from all that, they kind of lose their understanding of the correct way to function in relation to other people, even in relation to themselves. And that's when you have to have more things written down, where would intuitively, I think, people would develop a harmonious way of functioning in relation to one another, the universe. As that disappears, you got to have more and more laws, more and more stuff written down to govern how people are going to conduct themselves. That just, to me, it makes total sense. Total sense.
Yeah, it's really amazing. I mean, the book really digs in, but it's kind of interesting the way it kind of like turns the whole thing inside out, to where it's like, I don't know, I feel kind of like I'm tempted to kind of focus on a scientific kind of paradigm like, in the subject matter, like, oh, white people are this and that, and their origins and how their minds work and stuff. I mean, like on a materialistic level, like what physically is happening, but it's like that's the way that they look at the world. Then I have to realize that I'm pretty white identified just in approaching an analysis of white people. I'm looking at them through their own eyes, so it's just a really interesting analysis, looking at it from a more fundamental, like looking at that kind of, like I was talking about, the quantum relativistic kind of thing, like looking at yourself while you're looking at someone else instead of just looking at non-objective, looking at the whole thing.
I think she would say, as the book title says, an African-centered perspective on the behavior, misconduct of white people. If you're non-African, a victim perspective, a victim of white supremacy perspective on their behavior, misbehavior, really. Our caller on the Skype line, did you have something you wanted to add? Caller on the Skype line?
Yes, hi. I just want to agree with that statement about on page 119, starting with other presuppositions, however, it was seen that it's only as laws become alienated from the human spirit that only to them that they put it down on paper. It's kind of funny because it seems like they're reinventing the wheel itself. Instead of just accepting the cosmic force that's out there, they're using laws that are written down on paper to substitute it for the role of the cosmic force. Do you understand what I'm saying?
Yes, ma'am. Absolutely.
So it's like a constant reinvention of the wheel, trying to say what's old is new and what's new is old, basically, That's all I wanted to say.
All right, on. Yeah, I'm glad other people. I remember, I think the first time I read this book, that really stood out to me. Just that one sentence, I think that one sentence kind of accurately sums up a lot of what, at least the portions that I've read on the program about the importance of writing things down to white people, and how it takes on a whole life of its own once it gets on paper, and why that is so important to them. It really stuck out to me. So I'm glad other folks listening in also thought that was important. Well, I guess either caller in Brooklyn or a female caller who just dialed in, and either of you have anything else, or are you all good for right now?
I'm good for right now.
Okay. Groovy.
I'll just throw in just a little. Sorry. I guess that's the only way that it could be generationally descended, like the super analytical and the literate mode as being like a. Can I be heard?
Yes, sir.
Yeah. No. Just like kind of like a like a time pod, just something that could preserve it through hundreds of years. Just to have it written down and have people refer to that, like, for potentially, thousands of years or whatever, however long people go along with it. But and just the fact that it's within our lifetimes. And beyond that, like, dozens of generations pass by without people really at bedrock of the paradigm. It's I guess it just adds to the credibility of the whole analysis.
Absolutely. That makes complete sense, I think. Complete sense.
Hello?
Oh, I can hear you. Can I be heard?
Yes.
Okay. Yeah. That makes... oh, go ahead. I'm sorry.
I mean, that sentence that I read before, on the last sentence of 119, at the very bottom, it also made me question what happened to the group of people who are classified as black. For the past 40 years, it seems that this particular group, known as black, have that they themselves moved away from the spirituality of themselves, which is why some, but not most, behave in a detrimental manner. That's what came to mind. I lost it. Hello?
Not a cataclysmic thing in that sense.
Hello?
It was just a feeling that came over all of us.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you.
Oh, I can hear you as well.
Yeah, I can hear both of you.
Yeah, so that's all I wanted to say.
Excellent points. Excellent points. Me think I will double check in case any of the any of our other callers, they have anything they want to share on that, or if we want to move forward. Great points. Great points.
I have one more thing too with the written on page 118 in the middle, the second paragraph, where it begins with the point to be made here. But if you move down to the second sentence, it says, when written expression becomes a dominant value, words become binding through writing, and values are perceived laws. Do you think there's a possibility that the reason why Europeans put so much reverence to the written law because they know that what comes out of their mouth is basically a lie? After all, the Native Americans did refer to the Europeans as a people with a forked tongue.
Make sure I understood the question. You said, do we think the reason that they have such reverence for writing is because of the fact that they are deceptive?
Correct.
I see a correlation. I definitely see a correlation. I think if you are going to deceive people, right, and particularly if people are going to maybe be suspicious about you and thinking, hey, these folks have a tendency to fudge and to not be honest about things. If you have something that people have a regard for, a book, and I mean, even keeping in mind, this goes right in line with Dr. Welsing's theory as well. Books used to be bound with leather. Dr. Welsing, total. That these books give me some sort of validity. That this is not just me saying this and I'm not making this up. This has been published. This has been widely circulated. And it even reminded me, I think they say that a lie gets around the world before the truth gets out of the door. Or I think that's pretty close to it. If you put something in writing, it has become public now. It's not just me lying to one person. It's a lie going out to untold numbers of people. If you think about the internet and other forms of publication, so even if I don't fool one person, even if you, right, if you don't believe it, you read it and you don't believe it, maybe 50 other people do. Now they pick it up and start saying, oh, it's true, I read it in such and such. That's true. It has a huge impact. If I'm going to lie and I can put something down in a book, bam, even if half the people read it and say that they don't agree, that other half, they will now be working for me, and they also will be pushing that lie. So it can have it can be a huge weapon. If I'm deceitful, it can be a huge weapon for me to help me push my lies, my deception even further than I ever could if I didn't have that book, if that makes sense.
And it also, what you just said also correlates to page 118 in the second paragraph, the second to last sentence. It says, written laws become the mark of European religion, aka white supremacy. The literate mode helped to impart the illusion of historicity and therefore of universal truth, which goes back to what you were saying, Gus.
And it becomes referenced. You see that when you read a book, particularly if you read a quote-unquote nonfiction or something that's quote-unquote a history book, it'll have references. So if I put a lie in this book and somebody else comes along and they say, well, I'm going to write a book too, and I will reference this book, that adds further validity to it, as though, hey, this is not just me saying this, it's also in this book. And I mean, white people are really good at that. We'll commission a team of writers to go out and write books that support the quote-unquote truth that we want people to think. So there'll be 50 books that push this perspective, and then we can reference one another and to add some quote-unquote validity or truthfulness to what it is that we're saying. White people they have been doing that for years, hundreds of years. I was surprised when I learned way back when that white people, they would commission and subsidize people. They would pay people to write books to give their perspective on what happened in the civil rights movement. And that is huge. Like, I hadn't even really, oh my God, one of our listeners, she told me just how this works. She wrote in, I'm lazy, I'm out in the sun now, and I'm going to enjoy my sunshine. But she emailed me. I'll read the Facebook's message that she sent me tomorrow. The gist of the story, it was, I might have to look at it. It was W.E.B. Du Bois. Got it. W.E.B. Du Bois wanted to write a biography. He wanted to write a biography on Nat Turner. White people came in and said, oh, no. Why don't you write one on John Brown? He changed his mind. White people got him to change his mind, and he ended up writing his biography on John Brown. Just right there, the impact of writing. When you hear victims, Dick Gregory, victim of racism, when he's singing John Brown's praise and, oh, what a wonderful white person and all the wonderful things that he did, and other victims who are praising John Brown, white people know the damage that they can do with one book. Just getting one person to write one book, as opposed to that book being written about Nat Turner and the impact that could have had. Du Bois wrote a book on Nat Turner and counter-violence, and we should change the way that we think about violence to liberate us. It switches and it gets written about John Brown. Whether it's true or not, just the power of having something in writing, generational impact. You have people 100 years from now who respect and admire the work of Du Bois, as opposed to the legacy of Du Bois focusing their attention on Nat Turner. It goes to John Brown, white person. White people really are skillful at being able to use books to push their racist Udumawazo, their racist agenda, if that makes sense in the context of what we've been talking about.
Yes, it does.
The person that called in from California, your line is open as well, California.
Hello, everyone. I just wanted to add one thing that I learned from a white person at a marketing seminar, and they have the belief that one way to gain instant credibility with people in a position of authority is to write a book. That their perception is, if you write a book, you're smart, you're an authority, you know more than other people in this certain area, and it gives you instant credibility. And he was advising everyone at that seminar, whatever it is that has anything to do with your brand, write a book on it. So I do believe they associate writing books with positions of authority and superiority. Because one thing he said, you can make a video and the video can be seen. He said, but you write a book, it's in black and white, it's in stone, basically, forever. And remember as well that when they went into Egypt and places in Africa and even in the Americas among like the Maya and Aztec, one of the things they made sure they did was take their sacred books and either steal them or burn and destroy them.
Yeah, they did that. They did that in to the so-called what is it? The South America, the Incans or Mayans. I guess the Mayans. They killed all of them and they destroyed all their books. That was like the first thing they did. They have like a few pages left in somewhere in Dresden or something. It's really easy. Once you start down this line, it's really hard to see any alternatives, like besides just how their whole ideological racist conquest.
Well, I was reading I wasn't reading. It was on a documentary program, but they were saying one of the reasons they have the information they do have on these people is that a lot of their stuff they also made in, monuments in stone. They inscribed a lot of stuff in the building, so that's how some stuff remained. But it was the Catholic priests and monks that came over that were burning and destroying a lot of their documents as supposed witchcraft.
And to go along with everyone's comments about writing a book shows that you are in a position of authority, that also coincides very well in this particular chapter 2 in the book, when Dr. Ayi talks about Constantine, Augustine, and how they used their assembly in the quest for domination via religion, and how they were able to finagle those who were practicing pagan, I guess you could say, rituals, and converting them into Christianity to expand the Roman Empire.
Right, I know they had councils where they came together to decide which books would be canonized for the Christians, and there were laws where you would be put to death for possessing the books. Like for the average lay person to possess the books or to read the books was forbidden with penalties of a death sentence. So they I guess, have a long history of wanting to control information as well.
Yeah, but it's like it's so easy to it makes sense, and it's just really easy for them to say that that's progress, that the state would be, forging a way for their religion to, expand, I guess, in their lack of logic or, just in that need for power of the, recessive nature or whatever. Just, yeah, this is correct. We got to lead all these heathens, but it's like no one else's religion included a little clause that said, and everybody else is wrong. Wow.
That's all for now.
Right on. I will give out the number and then again encourage folks to dial in. I hope people have been reading. If you have questions, if you read something and you think it's important, because I'm not going to be able to read everything, and I don't intend to read the whole section, but if you have a section that you think is important that folks should think about, dial in to share. If you have confusion around a section that you read, let us know. If something that we've discussed is not clear, doesn't make sense, you have questions, dial in. The number is 760-569-7676. And the code is 564943 pound. This is a book study group, so it's not supposed to be one person dominating, but different folks offering their perspective, questions, or thoughts about the book Dr. Marimba Ayi's YURUGU. Still with chapter 2, I'll read a few more sections and see if folks have some thoughts around these passages. This is on 124. The subtitle is The Judeo-Christian Schism.
Judeo-Christian Schism, subheading, page 124. Okay, she writes, the Christian formulation becomes the next identifiable stage in the development of the European Unimoroho as expressed by institutionalized religion. Christianity owed much to the early Judaic tradition, so much, in fact, that the question becomes, what exactly was the difference in this new religion? In what way was it new? Why did the followers of Jesus consider themselves distinct from even antagonistic toward other Jews and vice versa? According to European tradition, the critical theological differences between Jews and Jesus are fixed on his claim to be the Son of God, and correlatively, the refusal of the Jews to recognize him as the Son of their God. But the ideological issue is lodged in the implications of Jesus' teachings for Jewish nationalism and the cultural imperialistic implications of Paul's elaboration and interpretation of them. From this perspective, the schism and resulting antagonism makes political sense. I do not impose consciously political motives on any of these teachings. I mean rather to point to the political implications of the ideas when put into the context of embryonic European nationalist and cultural behavior patterns. In other words, the point is that some religious statements can be used to support certain political objectives while others cannot. For the Jews, while their God was projected as the one true God for humankind, the emphasis and essential feature of Judaism was not the possibility of worldwide application, but rather the specialness of the Jewish people. According to them, it is only the Jews who had been chosen to fulfill God's prophecy. For thou and holy people unto the Lord thy God. Lord, the Lord thy God hath chosen thee to be a special people unto himself above all people that are upon the face of the earth. This is Deuteronomy chapter 7, verse 6. But they were to fulfill this prophecy by presenting a normative example to other peoples, not through conquest. And she has that in italics. I'm skipping down. This is on page 125. As the European Udamoroho began to emerge in the wider context created by an ever-expanding self-image, itself defined in terms of ever-increasing power, the needs of European nationalistic, chauvinistic expression required much more than Judaism provided. Judaism did indeed promote and encourage several of the rather critical values viewed as necessary for the planted European asili, but clearly its nationalistic statement was grossly inadequate for the expanding European self-image. While it was a statement of political self-determination and defensive social cohesion, it was not a statement of world imperialistic objectives. The Judaic vision was elitist, isolationist. The expanded European vision sought the control and cultural exploitation of other groups. Terence Penelham says, when Christianity appeared on the scene, it came not merely as one more religion, but rather as an implacable rival to all others. It claimed total allegiance from all men. Very important section in my view. I'll read one last paragraph. This all relates the same theme. This is at the bottom of 126. It is the European Udamuwazo, cultural thought structure that makes the Christian statement appear to be conceptually more complete. The significance of Spengler's observation is that while the overwhelming body of the Christian formulation as taught by Jesus and interpretively elaborated by Paul was consistent with and not contradictory to Jewish belief, two critical and related features were added. These additional features molded the Jewish idea into an ideological statement that supported and justified not only a nascent European definition of value, but also a new brand of imperialism, an imperialism that suited the European Ultima Rojo. One of those features was the rhetorically, she has that in italics, universalistic and non-exclusive definition of the group or object, non-white people, that, quote-unquote, could be saved. The other was the related feature of the mandate to proselytize. Christianity, then, became the ideal formulation for the unlimited expansion of a culture with a supremacist ideology, and at the same time, it provided the ideological tool for the control of the resultant empire through its rhetorical, universalistic component. Very significant section, in my view, just breaking down that schism and why the Christian ideology, in Dr. Ani's view, better fit with the Asili and Ultima Rojo of racist man, racist woman. If your objective is domination, control of the entire universe, you need to go out and be proselytizing. You're going to need missionaries. You're going to need people to go out and say, hey, you backward, primitive, ignorant people, you need to put down whatever your religious and spiritual practices and beliefs are. It's not the real thing. You got to get with white Jesus. I think we have talked about consistently on this program, white Jesus. I spoke with Dr. Welsing yesterday, and she talked about how that white Jesus infection is a huge obstacle for us in terms of us not being able to correctly understand what it means to be a white person and do the correct things to protect, defend ourselves from white aggression. I think very important segment that breaks down why for white people to maintain, go out, practice, stop the world with white supremacy, white terrorism, Christianity provided a better framework. If that makes sense, perhaps folks listening in agree, disagree, you can voice those concerns as well. Let's see.
For me, it does.
Likewise.
It makes a lot of sense, especially now that I've learned more about Judaism outside of the European distortion of it, I should say. Because, coming through Christianity, you will have that idea that everybody's supposed to practice this religion, and I've learned that there was never any proselytizing among the Hebrew people. You never find anything in Torah where they're supposed to go out and make other people change or follow. It absolutely is more exclusionary. Their role was to be priests and kings unto the nations, but not to dominate and rule over them, but, to be more of an example. And from the history that I've been learning lately, there's a theory that the New Testament was actually written by an elite Roman family, and at the time of the first century, the Romans were dominating the Israelite or Hebrew people. So from what I was reading, it was a strategy of warfare to negate their religion, replace it with Christianity, put this power in the hands of the Romans, and thereby destroy the Israelite people, through destroying their culture and making them submit to this as well. And that's why this Jesus figure was created, along with him being the Son of God, because the Hebrew people would have never accepted that their God would impregnate a woman in any kind of way, and have this a demigod figure. That's European mythology.
I have a question for the
I can see it now.
I have a question for the female caller.
I can hear you.
Oh, yes. That passage you were reading, do you know if it was before the Council of Nicaea or was it after the Council of Nicaea?
You said the clash?
The passage you were referring to, was it written before the Council of Nicaea or after the Council of Nicaea?
I'm trying to understand what it is you're talking about that's written. You're saying the information I read recently where they were talking about Romans writing the New Testament?
Correct.
I believe they were saying it was during the 1st century because if you look up Roman Piso family on the internet or who wrote the New Testament, you'll come across a lot of sites. It'll do much more justice to it than I can. But it talks about particular people, and I think they were related with Herod, who was the ruler in Israel at that time, as well as some of the Roman officials listed in the New Testament. But it talks about, and this was during the 1st century, but it talks about how they were making this stuff up, and some of the characters are actually them, but they were doing this as a political power structure thing, or power struggle, I should say. It was definitely an act of warfare. I mean, even if you look at the European Jews today, you don't find a lot of them proselytizing, but when I look at their practices, the places they go, even like when they went from Europe over into Palestine or what's called the land of Israel, their behavior toward everyone there, trying to rule and take over, the fact that they're supposed to be allies with the United States, but there's no other country that has as many spies in the United States as the state of Israel. You find them in the European Jew, so-called Jew, in the highest seats of power as far as in, like the Council of Foreign Relations, the World Bank, World Health Organizations. You definitely see that way of white people just in them and the way that they function, and it very much is opposite to true, Hebrew ideology and culture. And non-white Jews will tell you that. As long as they haven't come into Judaism through the Ashkenaz, through the European, you'll get a whole different perspective. So, like hearing this, I can definitely see the difference, in what comes from them as far as Judaism and even in Christianity. Heck, I grew up hearing white people in the Christian church all the time saying that the church replaced Israel, and you won't find that anywhere in Hebrew scriptures.
I guess that's the remnants of the Roman Empire talking.
But Christianity has most definitely been an effective tool.
I agree.
I actually had an Igbo woman from Nigeria. She looked like she was ready to fight me when I was suggesting to her that her ancestors, that the tradition I became aware of is that they have Hebrew ancestry. And somehow she translated that to mean there was something errant about her believing in Jesus. She didn't want to give me her email address so I could send her the information. She didn't want to talk to me. Her whole demeanor changed once it got to white Jesus.
Yeah, there's something real emotional about like the whole I don't know, like the fingers of what white people have done and just like what they breed. It's like either I don't know. It seems like Judaism is kind of like so-called Judaism is like the first step away from that base of more spiritual, less objectified knowledge. And it could be, I wasn't there back then. I don't know, where all these, where it all, it's all about faith or whatever, no, I'm not going to argue, but,
well, in Judaism, that's not an it's all about faith practice. That's more Christianity, where they say you just have to believe in this and, you'll be saved. That's why a lot of times Christians will use the New Testament, but when you mention any of the other laws in the Torah to them, they'll be like, oh, we're not under the law. You just have to believe. But then they'll beat you up, basically, if you don't believe what they believe.
Well, but it's kind of like I'm sorry. Well, I was just like, it just kind of seems like it's a universalized thing where it's not like about like you know, it's not about the thing that was transmitted from, like, you know, your predecessors, like your ancestors. It's more about like some kind of universalized kind of thing where somebody says that if you do some certain thing, then you're going to go to afterlife that's good or something. For anybody.
The tradition in Judaism, they believe in reincarnation. There's no heaven and hell thing like that in Judaism. That's Christianity again. That's the introduction of other ideologies into it. But a lot of us don't know that because we came up in church and we were never taught. You know, from everything I've been learning in Judaism, it's an African religion. They were African people. You still find people before the Ashkenazim or white people ever heard of Judaism or Torah for hundreds, if not thousands of years. You can go like Saudi Arabia, Yemen, and find people there that still hold traditions, and they do things differently than the Ashkenazim do. But there's definitely an oral tradition and things passed down from ancestors and predecessors in Judaism. It's just not where, you know, if you're not taught that. But again, a lot of our perceptions are skewed through the view of white people and Christianity, you know, and the Bible that they've given us.
Just to add that also in the Old Testament, in the Bible, there are references of the Jews partaking in sacrificing and, you know, other pagan rituals, which in the New Testament, all that has been scrapped to the side. So I thought that was another interesting point in between the differences between Old Testament and the New Testament.
Well, I'll say this. Animal sacrifice was common among all people back in the day, so it wouldn't be called pagan sacrifice because it was an animal. Offered, you know, made offerings with animals. But the thing that a Jew would consider pagan is the concept of offering a human as a sacrifice to a deity.
No, I understand that. I'm not dogging one religion for doing paganism. I'm just using the term that Europeans have referred to groups of people who do practice in a sacrificing way. In the eyes of the Roman Empire, that's a no-no because they themselves are the authority and they want to keep their structure of power intact, which is why they use Christianity as a imperialism technique or application. That's the only thing I want to make a distinction of.
But I really wonder if the Romans were against animal sacrifice because I don't think they were because a lot of the people in their empire were pagans, and I still think they did a lot of dirty and vile and nasty things. I just think for the sake of dominating the Jewish people in that religion, they outlawed and said, you know, animal sacrifices are over, but they were still vaunting up this human sacrifice. To me, that's weirder than it all. You know what I mean?
I understand what you mean, but I guess the whole human flesh and I guess where the whole lynching thing comes from and the castration thing, I mean, there's some other force that the Roman Empire must be in colluding with that's not what we know as or been trained to know as this concept of God. So I don't know.
It definitely seems like they have an obsession with some kind of, I don't know, feeling like they get power or something spiritually, however perverse it is, from human sacrifice or killing humans. And
right.
Beginnings and things like people.
Exactly.
Shock and awe.
Yeah, but I you know what? It's something, the lady's name is Kay Griggs. If you go to Google and go to Google videos and look up her name, it's Griggs, Griggs. She's a white woman whose husband was in the Army in some high level, and she starts to talk about pedophilia within the ranks of high officials in government, and then I guess some people would call it like Illuminati. I'm not sure if specifically if she was talking about Freemasonry or things, you know, the higher ranks. But she talked about them believing that they get power to live longer through the rape of children, especially little boys, and taking their innocence. So it seems like somewhere in their culture there's this perversion or feeling of gaining power or thinking they will live longer through sacrificing human life or, you know, through sacrificing childhood and innocence.
that speaks to like the concept of the Asili. Just they need power at their core, and so then everything else that comes from them that is going to be fulfilling that core is going to be seeking out of power. And then in the refinement stage, you can't just be. It's got to be implicit after the explicit phase is first. I guess that's like, I feel like even I've got an Ethiopian friend. She says the J, we're talking about Judaism, the letter J came, was like an adaptation, like a European adaptation where they co-opted the Jewish religion. It was like, I guess, Yahoo or something like that. But it's just like they co-opted it, whatever it was. I mean, it's not about literacy. It's about the fact that we are all in this universe, and we all have a spiritual base, if anyone does. So, I mean, like, just to say that there's a group of people that are, somehow more spiritually situated than others is kind of ludicrous. But,
well, I don't... From what I've learned, I know that is the viewpoint I have heard from the Ashkenazim, and that's what I'll generally refer to the white Jews as, although you have some white ones that are Sephardim as well. But because I heard a lot of this stuff, in the same ideology, I asked a rabbi, a black rabbi, and one of the things he told me, there's nothing that teaches that Jews or Israel are better than the other people, but they were chosen for a select purpose in their role to the other nations. Not that anybody else was worthless or didn't have a significant thing to do, but the Torah was all about them and what they were supposed to do. As far as the letter J, I hear a lot of people saying that something like it didn't come around to the 16th century, and that's fine, but that has to do with English. That has nothing to do with Hebrew. And then I heard somebody say there was no J in ancient Hebrew or something, and so I asked, and it was. That sound, not the letter, of course, because Hebrew letters and stuff are totally different. But there was a J. But they did, I think, even in Old English, for a lot of stuff we would say the J sound for today, it was a Y sound. So, like, when you look at ancient maps of Africa, places where so-called Jews would have been, you'll see somewhere it's written Yahudi or Yahudim, but I'm not sure what the letter J has to do with the role of Israel or Jews to other people.
I guess I'm just trying to say that, like, it's just like, it got co-opted at some point and kind of distilled into something that was functional for those people that needed power, aka, so-called white people, whatever. And then the Christianity would be like the next step where, after just distinguishing themselves as having some sort of inflated importance or some sort of a universal context to where they've got something that everyone else needs, and to say, oh, but now, you guys can enter the fold, as our, as our sidekicks, as our little, like, helpers, like...
Talking about Christians?
Footstools, I mean, just, like, the whole, like... Yeah, the proselytization, the kiss the ring and everything, just...
I wanted to...
Just interesting.
I was going to hop in, not to cut the discussion off, but I just wanted to... we have at most an hour left. See if we can touch on a few more portions from the book. See if anybody has any thoughts on some of the remaining portions. If any of the folks that are listening in, if they want to call to chime in, the number to dial is 760-569-7676, and the code is 564-943#. *6 if you have questions or comments, and on the TalkShoe line it is *8. This is on 129, a little more than halfway through what we were supposed to read for today. She writes, ironically, it is precisely the mystical ingredient of the Jesus legend that gives Christianity its religious appeal, as well as other aspects that are taken from prior cultural traditions. There is no sense in which Schoenfeld's statement above can be called quote-unquote objective, even if it is agreed that for a moment even if it is agreed for the moment that quote-unquote objectivity is a valid concept. His use of the term quote-unquote pagan corresponds to that of not only Christian and Jewish theologians, but to quote-unquote non-religious and so-called objective European social scientists. There are few terms common in both ordinary and scientific usage that so blatantly reveal the Udamoroho collective personality and self-image of Europeans as does the term pagan. It is perhaps the epitome of European arrogance and self-delusion that Europeans can with seriousness describe first world non-white people as being quote-unquote irreligious. Schoenfeld points out disparagingly that the church has absorbed many so-called pagan customs and beliefs. He does not, however, state the political significance of this fact, that much of Christian mythology comes from older cultural and religious traditions, which has aided the Christians in their quote-unquote conversion of Africans and other non-European peoples. This factor served the objectives of Western European cultural imperialism, i.e. the system of white supremacy, for white people of other cultures were in part being quote-unquote converted to their own conceptions. They were at the same time being absorbed into an organization that controlled them for the benefit of Europeans. Very important paragraph, or I guess two paragraphs, in my opinion, some of which we've touched on, just white people stealing the practices, spiritual beliefs of non-white people, contaminating those beliefs to fit their own racist agenda, and then going back and getting the non-white people to accept a contaminated version of their own beliefs that will better support racism, white supremacy. Very skillful work that white people have done and continue to do. I'm skipping forward a little bit. This is still all in the same chapter, chapter 2, Religion and Ideology. This is on page 137. This is under the subtitle, The Threat of Non-Orthodox Christianity. I'm kind of keeping an eye on the switchboard, so get a hand up if you have questions, if something doesn't make sense, or if the wind has picked up and I'm not clear. One of the concerns of this chapter is the relationship between religion and national consciousness, i.e. behavior. Nowhere is this relationship better exemplified than in European cultural history. In no culture is the supportive relationship of formalized religion more successfully developed and elaborated. One of the correlates of this view of the relationship between religion and nationalism is that in order to understand the dynamics of a particular religious statement, one must first be aware of the ideological commitment of the people who identify with it, their Udamoroho, and their relationship to other cultures. This is, of course, a radical departure from the usual approach to the study of religion, and in direct conflict with Christian theologians. Those who would argue the quote-unquote revolutionary political implications of Christianity, see liberation theology literature, also imply rather unconvincingly that the 200-year imperialistic quest of Western Europe and Euro-America was successfully maintained in spite of a religion that spoke for more humanistic goals. That is simply implausible and does not make sense. It is not contradiction, but consistency that has made for Western European white terrorist imperial success. I will read that last sentence again. It is not contradiction, but consistency that has made for white supremacist imperial success. Elaine Pagels, in her interpretation of the significance of the developments of early Christianity supports my view in that she points to the social and political implications of apostolic Christianism as opposed to those of Gnostic tradition that the Orthodox Church condemned and over which it triumphed, although we must not confuse political triumph with spiritual triumph. Perhaps it would be more fitting to begin with a discussion of the African or Kemetic ancient Egyptian origins of Christianity, of Christian mythology and symbolism, though Pagels does not refer to these at all. But since we cannot take time here for such a discussion, the reader is referred to the works of Gerald Massey, John G. Jackson, Yosef Ben Yachanan, and others. Suffice it to say that the mythology and symbolism surrounding Usir, also known as Asar and Osiris by the Greeks, introduced the concept of a resurrected Savior 3,000 years before the advent of Christianity. A study of this tradition also explains why the date of December 25th is used for the birth date of Jesus, the symbolism of the stable as a place for his birth, and 3 wise men, and so forth. Clearly, however, there had to have been something quote-unquote special, something different about the formulation of what is now accepted as biblical Christianity, or it would not have been so well suited to the archaic European Udama Rojo as expressed in the Roman state. In Pagel's book, The Gnostic Gospels, one of the things that we already know is reaffirmed. Gnosticism was unacceptable to and considered heresy by those who were in the process of establishing the Orthodox Christian Church. These Gospels were written out of the religion. Pagels offers a plausible explanation, one that fits with my understanding of the Western European cultural reality. Gnosticism was not different enough from the Kemetic and other ancient origins. Its Udama Rojo was too close to these. It was neither politically oriented nor materialistic enough. Resurrection was understood symbolically and spiritually much deeper than unending physical existence. Pagels tells us that Gnostics believed that resurrection was to be experienced spiritually, that one experienced Christ on a spiritual level. This may occur in dreams, in ecstatic trance, in visions, or in moments of spiritual illumination. Rebirth for the ancients was, after all, a result of illumination and intense self-knowledge, a heightened spiritual level of development. But contrary to this, orthodoxy that opposed the Gnostic view was indeed threatened by it, arguing, as Tertullian did, that as Christ rose bodily from the grave, so every believer should anticipate the resurrection of the flesh. Interestingly enough, this is precisely the criticism that Schoenfield has of Christianity when comparing it with Judaism. But in this case, the materialization of the God concept serves not to bring it closer to the human, but facilitates its use as the justification for authority. Tertullian insists that the resurrection of Christ is undeniably physical, material in a very real earthly sense. Tertullian declares that anyone who denies the resurrection of the flesh is a heretic, not a Christian. The Gnostic emphasis on personal spiritual growth and development, along with its de-emphasis on proselytization, made it ill-suited for imperial quest. I will stop there. That is on page 139. 139. I guess I'll skip to the bottom and read this one quick section where she's quoting Pagels, who she's saying does give an accurate explanation of why Gnosticism had to be rejected totally. Pagels, this is not Dr. Ayi, Pagels writes, the doctrine of bodily resurrection also serves an essentially political function. I think that's one of the things Dr. Ayi asserts consistently, is that everything white people do is driven by a political objective of white supremacy. Pagels goes on, he says, it legitimizes the authority of certain men who claim to exercise leadership over the churches as the successors of the Apostle Peter. From the 2nd century, the doctrine of bodily resurrection has served to validate the apostolic succession of bishops, the basis of papal authority to this day. This is on page 139. And I think all of this extremely important, just in terms of why that image of Christ and the whole resurrection story and all of that is so important, even down to why you've got to have an image of white Jesus, why that body's got to be up in every church, why it's so important, why it has so much meaning, why white people say it has so much meaning, and for the victims it has so much meaning. It directly gives authority to white people over what's supposed to happen, not only in the church but in all other areas of people activity. Very important, I think. All of this is, or I won't say all, but what I was reading was from page 137 to 139 in the chapter 2. Let's see. I will. Let's see. I'll read a little bit more from this section. I don't want to take up a whole lot more time just reading. If folks have things they want to share, I'll read this last bit. This is on the bottom of 139, and it goes to 140. I'll read like a couple more paragraphs and then check in. Bottom of 139. What Pagels argues is that the idea or claim of the resurrection of Jesus provided a source of authority for his earthly successor, Peter. It was crucial that some such claim be possible, given the fact that the leader or absolute authority within the movement was gone. And hundreds of people were claiming to interpret his teachings in almost as many different ways. Very important. Universalism. We can't have a lot of non-white people coming up with their own view on religion or anything else. It's got to be what white people say goes, and what we say is universal. You got to do it this way. This is the one way of thinking about it. It can't be everybody else can have their own view, which is equally valid to ours. Can't work that way. In order for Peter to be the established rock or foundation of a structured, institutionalized organization, all other groups had to be discredited. What better way than through his actual contact with a physically resurrected Jesus, who had explicitly given him authority to begin the institutionalization of Jesus's teachings. Given this political necessity for a doctrine of physical resurrection, the Gnostic teachings of a more metaphysical and symbolic concept of resurrection were most threatening to the establishment of the church. Not only did the apostles get authority in this way, but they were the only ones who could confer it on those who succeeded them. Christians in the 2nd century used Luke's account to set the groundwork for establishing specific, restricted chains of command for all future generations of Christians, concludes Pagels, so that present popes must rely on their connection to Peter, who had originally witnessed the physical resurrection of Jesus, for their authority. I'm skipping down to the final paragraph on 140. These insights of Pagels coincide with my own analysis of the function of institutionalized religion in European development. The secular, historical emphasis within Christian doctrine, and this includes the various non-orthodox forms that evolved as a result of the Reformation, is a direct result of the need to claim superiority to other religions, which in turn imparts cultural and therefore political superiority or control. No Christian will accept an authentically spiritual or metaphysical interpretation of Christian teachings. Herein lies the telling contradiction of Christian theology. To be Christian is to insist on a quote-unquote historical Christ in a rigidly secular sense. Yet this adjective should contradict the noun it purports to describe. The reason for this strange characteristic of Christianity as it was interpreted in the development of archaic European civilization has to do with the Udumoroho that was also becoming standardized, as well as the ideological needs of the new order. The spurious dichotomy between history and mythology would become the handmaiden of the civilized primitive dichotomy, so essential to Western European cultural nationalism and imperialism. According to European nationalism, other traditions and earlier ones were expressions of mythological beliefs only. Christianity was an expression of historical fact. To this day, the most threatening appositional phrase that an avowed Christian can be presented with is, quote-unquote, Christian mythology. To accept its validity is to shake the ground of his/her belief. That is on 141. I will double check if any of the folks listening in have thoughts, comments, questions. Make sure everything is clear.
Yeah, it was clear. You summed up what I was trying to get at. I wasn't trying to discount anyone's beliefs or anything. But I was talking to the other female caller about how Judaism was kind of like it wasn't the original thing, like that on page 129 where she was talking about how it was just the fact that much of Christian mythology comes from older cultural and religious traditions, which has aided the Christians in their conversion, quote-unquote conversion of Africans and other non-European peoples. They were in part being converted to their own conceptions. Yeah, that was pretty important. Yeah, and also like just the way like Discovery Channel and stuff, all these like in this modern, quote unquote modern time, like they have all these kind of expose shows about like the Shroud of Turin is one of them. It's like Jesus is like some rag that was supposedly on him, and it perfectly preserved a negative image of like the dirt that was on his nose and his forehead and whatnot. Like so that you gotta like, was Jesus really real? Like here's a rag that might have an imprint of his face on it. And we're like, oh, well, maybe he was, maybe he wasn't. But it's like, it's just this I don't know, it's just really weird. It's really, I don't even know what to say. It's just very, very impractical as something that makes sense. Like, it doesn't make sense, basically. But it makes sense in the context of white supremacy.
Do y'all remember that scene from Amistad where Jaime Ansu's character, he's with the other guy, and they're in the prison and they have the Bible and they're going through it? And I don't remember, I think it must have been a picture Bible or something. There was an illustration in it of Jesus, and they were reading it and saying how it reminded them of some figure in their culture who died for his people or something, so it was easier for them to accept it. And I think that's part of what works with Christianity and dominating non-white people, is because they have taken a lot of the mythology from other groups of people who were not, Romans, whether it was from the Persians. I think there's even similarities to Buddha in the Jesus character, but I think that made it very effective for them to dominate people and get them to follow that as well.
I have a comment.
Yeah, and they were the only ones. Sorry, go ahead.
On page 141, towards the bottom of the paragraph, it says, for according to Pagel, that Gnostics argued that only one's own experience offered the ultimate criteria of truth, which completely contradicts the Roman Empire universal truth method. Pagel tells us that they celebrated every form of creative invention as evidence that a person has become spiritually alive. On this theory, the structure of authority can never be fixed into an institutional framework. It must remain spontaneous, charismatic, and open. But that is not how empires are built, which is the main objective of the Asili according to the Roman Empire. It does not suit the European Asili, and the European imperial quest has been, on page 142, more successful than any other, because it has always been based on the claim of superior culture. Then if you move down to somewhat in the middle of the second paragraph on page 142, Pagel also argues that another aspect of the threat to orthodoxy posed by Gnosticism was their lack of recognition of the church hierarchy, aka authority, aka political institution. Valentina says that the Gnostic joined together as equals, enjoying mutual love, spontaneously helping one another, as opposed to the ordinary Christians who wanted to command one another, out-rivaling one another in their empty ambition, inflated with lust for power, each one imagining that he is superior to the quote-unquote other. And I thought that was really, really important on why. That was the other reason on why Gnosticism had to be eliminated in order for the Roman Empire to utilize Christianity, which the Romans encompass other non-European cultures like mythology to conquer the world with this universalism truth application. That's all.
The way I saw that was kind of like how, like, you know, I spent a lot of time until recently around white people. I mean, I didn't really have any non-white friends. Like, I was kind of just immersed till, like, you know, maybe 6 months ago. But and I'm black. I'm a black male. But what was I saying? Sorry. Oh yeah, like the white people who adopt, like, you know, they'll put on they'll put on some other culture, so-called cultures, clothing, and they'll act like they're Buddhists, or they'll act like they're Taoists, or, you know, they'll move to China and, you know, or go to India and do Hinduism. It's like, it just doesn't really, that's not what their core is. Their core, like in the next paragraph, she says, in a sense, Gnosticism was anachronistic, while Orthodox Christianity was right on time, quote unquote. Religious formulations that were more spiritual and transcendent, less political and secular in intent, were simply not expedient. Like, it just didn't make their Asili grow. So it kind of speaks to, like, just that all white people are kind of like that's what their nature is not to be transcendent and to be, you know, realistically spiritual in a universe, in a cosmic context. That's just not what they're built to do. So, like, if they're not doing what they do, which is empire and just, you know, conquering people and stuff, then they're kind of in the minority of their own people. Like, they're not, it's just not them.
I think even in going into those other religions, that whether it's conscious or subconsciously, either they go in with a mind to dominate, or it ends up that way with them attempting to dominate. I've seen it, of course, in Christianity. You know, where they will go in among the groups they've conquered and given Christianity to, like let's say like the Haitian people. They practice Catholicism, but you would still find a lot of African elements in their religion. And I think from afar, the Catholic Church didn't really bother with that. But I see a lot of Protestant or Christian groups now, you know, and they heavily criticize it and try to change it and get the African elements out. They condemn it and say it's, you know, it's voodoo, it's devil worship, whatever, that, you know, they do that to it because it doesn't fall in the construct of what they deem as the absolute, you know, what must be. But I've also heard people in Judaism as well talk about what the white people in Judaism do when they come in contact with the non-white people. Even if the non-white people's traditions are older, you'll always find the white person trying to usurp it and take it over and make everybody, you know, bend to their way of doing things.
And I guess one of their other tricks, they will, if it is apparent that non-white people came up with something, they'll just color them and say, oh no, these were not non-white people, these were white people. Yes, you've got it. They were on the continent of Africa. They came up with whatever this practice is, but they were not black. They were white. You got a little confused. They'll find some way of taking credit for it. Deception. There are two, I guess, other people. There are two other people, or two other passages, two other passages that I'll read. And then if anything you all want to share on the totality of what we've been talking about, reading from this section of the book, Religion. This chapter goes on for another, I thought it was about almost another 50 pages. Let's see, just want to make sure it goes to, almost 50 pages. Like next week, if we do to 210, we'll read all the rest of chapter 2. So this is a pretty long chapter. So we'll next week be spending a little more time talking about the role of religion. And then we'll go into the beginning of chapter 3, the power of symbols. That should be lots of fun as well. I'll start. This is on page 143. Subtitle is Augustine and Political Conservatism. Okay. The strength of the Christian ideological formulation in its function as a tool of European cultural imperialism is twofold. Number one, it subtly justifies two kinds of political activity. That is, it appeals to two different layers of the world's population. Number two, it unifies the conquerors while simultaneously pacifying the conquered. Wow. This, in part, is reflected in the strikingly different tones or moods of the Old and New Testaments in terms of their political possibilities for the Roman Empire. The Old Testament is extremely militaristic and aggressive. It is often an unveiled directive, the blatant command that a homogeneous and limited cultural group resist all alien influence through the prohibition of intermarriage and other social intercourse with cultural groups adhering to different ideologies. The task of the New Testament, on the other hand, is much more complicated. What was later interpreted as the directive for aggression is there stated as the desire to spread enlightenment. What developed into the mandate to bring those who are not like us under our domain is there molded into the rhetoric of quote-unquote soul saving. And at the same time, it sells passive acceptance to those souls. The Christian statement as an established aspect of European culture is, after all, a nationalistic ideology, in that it is the expression of the ideology of a particular culture, just as any religious statement is, and its function in this regard is to serve the interests of that culture. The docility and lack of aggression of the conquered peoples serves this interest, and so the Christian directive is dual in nature. While it provides a justification for a world order in the service of a European God, its teachings encourage others to be non-political and discourages their cultural nationalism, identification with their national gods and belief systems. There is a curious characterization of Jesus as a quote-unquote revolutionary in the literature of liberation theology and black theology. Unfortunately, persecution and unpopularity do not necessarily make ideas revolutionary. The Jewish ideology in its stubborn nationalism could in this sense be considered more revolutionary in the face of Roman policy than that of Jesus and his followers. It would be very difficult to imagine, if we did not consistently put our data into the context of the European asili, how any historian or social theorist could identify the so-called Christian virtues, i.e., the Christian ethic or mode of behavior, as being in any way new or innovative at the time of Jesus. The mandate to regard and treat one another as brothers and sisters, i.e., as members of a quote-unquote family kin group, had existed probably since the beginning of human civilization in Africa. The African ideological statement of this mode of behavior as an ethical imperative is much more philosophically profound than the Christian European statement of it, and, of course, so much more consistent and authentic. It originates in a spiritualistic worldview. What was new about the teachings that purported to have resulted from the activities of Jesus was that they proclaimed that one was to treat members of other cultural groups in this way, and more importantly, one was to treat one's enemies in this same way. Enemies being those who were hostile to one's cultural group or one's family, white people. This directive is, of course, debilitating and castrating to political, cultural nationalism and counter to the demands of self-determination. This feature, along with that of the direction of attention towards another world in which justice is sought, may certainly combine to form a new statement, but it can hardly be called a politically revolutionary one. Phenomenal passage in my view. I suspect that would severely disrupt the white Jesus contamination white chip of a lot of victims, but I think she is, brilliant analysis in my view. And she goes on in a few of the other pages between 140 and 150 where she talks about how the white Christianity that we have been given, it is not political. It is not something that will motivate, encourage non-white people to function in a mode of self-preservation, to adequately deal with racist man, racist woman, racist child. I'm skipping forward just so that we'll have the remainder of the program. If people want to call in, share, any of the folks that are on the line, if they want to express any of their ideas about anything we've discussed so far. This last bit that I'll read is on 150. And Mbiti, in his discussion of African religions, just talking about the differences, says that traditional religions have no missionaries to propagate them, and one individual does not preach his religion to another. Traditional religions are not universal. They are tribal or national. The propagation of a religion would involve propagating the entire life of the people. She goes on. Also on 150, Jomo Kenyatta says, in Gikuyu religion, there is no provision for official priesthood, nor is there any religious preaching. converting campaigns are, of course, a thing unknown. This is due to the fact that the religion is interwoven with traditions and social customs of the people. Thus, all members of the community are automatically considered to have acquired, during their childhood teachings, all that is necessary to know about religion and custom. The duty of imparting this knowledge to the children is entrusted to the parents, who are looked upon as the official ministers of both religious ethics and social customs. This is Dr. Ani again. All religions promote cultural nationalistic expression, and Christianity is only universal in that European cultural nationalism is characterized by universal or international imperialistic ambition. This theme will recur again and again throughout our study, and its recognition is crucial to an understanding of the uniqueness of the European mind and political effectiveness of European cultural imperialistic ideology in the quest for world power. It is a theme that is masked and subtly expressed in the presentation of European culture. The international character of the European political ambition or objective has been continually and tragically for its objects, victims, non-white people. The international character of the European political ambition or objective has been continually and tragically confused with the spurious universalism of European cultural and ideological identification. In many respects, of course, this is precisely the desired effect of such formulations that become part of the armaments of European imperialism. The proselytization of Christianity has perhaps the greatest culturally immobilizing and demoralizing effect on its objects, victims. For our caller 304, I'm reminded of the television program V, where they say, "We come always in peace." Standard lie on the part of white people. Continuing, she writes, since its inception, the church has participated in and supported the European imperialist enterprise. European culture is no different from other cultures in this respect, since the relationship between religion and nationalism is most certainly a universal cultural fact. No cultural group goes off to war without invoking the names of its national gods, and the reasons for declaring war are usually reformulated on a conscious level in religious terms, or most certainly in terms that are consistent with the religiously stated ideology. The nature of this relationship in the European context is only special because European imperialism and European nationalism are so unique and intense. The uniqueness and intensity issue from the asili of the culture and the Udamaroho through which it is expressed. I will stop, or actually I will read last sentence, but let us briefly trace the nature of the relationship between Christianity and the European imperialist venture. And that is where I stopped at, since we're supposed to go to 150. So we will continue picking up right there next week, 150 through 210. Just adding 10 pages, 150 to 210 for next week. Any of the folks that are listening in, if y'all have comments, we have a little less than 30 minutes left. If y'all have any thoughts on the final bit that we've been reading, if anyone listening in, if you haven't commented yet, I'm not taking late calls. You got to get your hand up before 2:45. If you think you might want to say something, I would recommend that you get your hand up now. The number to dial is 760-569-7676, and the code is 564943 pound. Caller 304, if you also wanted to participate, let me know. I can give you a ring as well. Any of the folks listening in, did you all have comments, questions?
Well, it's really helped me to understand a lot more about history, and as far as, like, I'm not trying to beat anybody over the head with it. It's just that, because what I study is Torah, and I've been studying the history of Judaism, but it makes a lot more sense to me. The Inquisition makes more sense now. The long-standing war of the Catholic Church against anybody practicing Judaism makes more sense to me. Even their war against Islam or Muslim people now. And it's generally because those people have an ideology or culture that, well, I guess Islam could be a bit more universal, but Judaism particularly, historically, they were not, and they did not believe in loving your enemies outside of your people, per se. And one of the things, the war against Jews has always been about the Talmud. And if you hear anything, they'll talk about how the Talmud is anti-Christian, anti-Gentile. The reason that it was because the persecution of the Jews was going on by the church throughout these times, and the Talmud, from what I've been taught, was a manual teaching the Jews how to deal with their enemies. Like, let's say, if you see them fall into a ditch, when you're at war with them, you don't help them, you let them stay there. And in introducing my friend to, to the C.O.W.S and counter racism and the program on not helping white people, he had a problem with it first, but then he went back and started reading Talmud, and he found out that it agrees with counter-racist, suggestions in that. What you're helping understand a lot more, even for their war on anybody practicing that, because it definitely would impede empire.
Yeah, it also erases the label of conspiracy, to be placed on whatever, imperialistic kind of push that people that call themselves white are undertaking, because it doesn't have to be like, it's not ideologically based deception. It's more of a biologically based deception, or conceptually, just like it's just an ideology. Ideology is just one facet of it, and it is.
I'm sorry.
Have you heard? I was just going to elaborating. It's just like it seems like they should. There should be more facts being public than there are. If things were actually as accessible as they're supposedly to be, like, as far as like power being accessible to all people, like everyone's, like, regardless of race, creed, religion, all that. But it's like, it seems like white people kind of know more than they let on, like, about their own origins, about just history in general, by virtue of having, like, burned all those books, like we were talking about and stuff like that. But it's like being white is synonymous with being a liar, like someone who is supreme as, like, a hyperbole. Like, I'm a white person. Like, what does that mean? Yeah, whatever. Yeah. So, yeah.
You know what I was thinking?
Can I be heard? Hello?
Yes. We
I
can hear you.
Oh, okay. I'm sorry. I didn't mean to cut you off.
No, I said we can hear you.
Okay. I think from the perspective of when we look at the Bible and we look at European history, I think from an African American standpoint, our problem is, from what I can see, is that we don't know history. And because we don't know history, or we choose not to learn history, is the reason why I feel as though we're easily influenced. Because from reading, from the passages from what Gus said, by reading the Bible does exactly what it's supposed to do. It's supposed to indoctrinate you into European culture. If you learn Islam, it's supposed to indoctrinate you into nationalism. If you study any other religion, it's supposed to indoctrinate you into their culture. But because African Americans don't know their history, and they are always studying other people's religion, we tend to follow other people's cultural nationalism. And I think that's something from the perspective that we have to, really start to understand. Even reading the Torah, what you study in the Torah, you tend to now understand Jewish nationalism. But if you do a historical analysis, all those different cultures started in one place, Africa. So when you study others' culture, if you start to trace where their particular philosophers or leaders were taught, they were all taught in Africa. So what happens is you have to do a comparative analysis of different cultures to understand where they got the information from. I give you a prime example, the swastika. It's an African symbol. It's not a European symbol. But because most of us don't know African symbolism, we wouldn't know that. So could you imagine if we start telling white people who hold up the flag, the swastika, dude, it's an African symbol. You white people stole it from us. Could you imagine them people would turn over in their graves? Whenever you start studying Holy Communion, as far as the blood symbolizing from Jesus and the cracker symbolizing the flesh, most of us all look at vampire and werewolf movies. That's where it comes from. If you think about Jesus coming back from the dead, the only thing we know coming back from the dead are zombies. So if you really just sit back and everything that you learn in the Bible and you just use your common sense and you apply it to history, you could truly understand that it was not intended for us. And we don't tend to learn history. I don't want to say all of us, but because most of us don't know African history, we don't. You can't really see it, and you're not intended to see it. So if you expect another race of people or another culture of people to teach you your own history, then you're stupid. I mean, I don't want to say stupid. Then it's your fault if you fall for all their deception.
One thing I wanted to ask, as you read, I'm thinking, you know how all people we would consider white now have not always been considered white? I'm thinking at some point the Protestant white supremacists became dominant. That would be the British and whatnot. It seems that all of the groups of other Europeans who had to earn their whiteness were those who either were still Catholics, like the Irish, or practice a form of Orthodox Christianity, like some of the Eastern Europeans, like, say, Armenians, who I think they're still probationary white people, I'm not sure, but also the Greeks, how you have the Greek Orthodox Church. It seems to me at some point the Protestant white people became in the dominant position to decide who was white, and those whom they mistreated were those who were not following their ideology concerning Christianity and religion.
Yes, and that actually happened due to Martin Luther, who Martin Luther King is named after. When he did his 99 Confessions, he felt as though the church, again, didn't want people to read the Bible. Because you remember, if you study religious history, the church didn't allow anybody else to read except for the church. So that's how Europe separated. And that's how you got Protestant. And from that, it's how you got all the other denominations. And that's how it separated Europe. And when the Europeans started coming to the United States, they started offering different sets of white people white privileges in the United States in order for everybody to join in to keep the African American as a permanent slave, the Africans as permanent slaves. So that's how you started getting those degrees of allowing the different Europeans to be white. Because you are right. They did not actually start being white people until they came to the United States, and they all participated in the subjugation of Africa. So, like I said, there is no white people that's really, truly for us if you really study history. Because when you study history, the white people that started slavery, you know, we got the Slavs were the first slaves. When Europeans came here, they all came as indentured servants. But white folks wanted to keep permanent slavery. So what did they do? They offered different groups of white people privileges. And they said, hey, if you want to earn certain privileges, then you have to want to keep the Africans permanently enslaved. That's why you have the Irish. Most of them are over the police force. How did they start out? They started out doing slave patrol, and they went into the police department. So when you see certain European groups in the police force and the firefighters, they started out that way doing slavery. But all you have to do really is study the history of America, and you can see how they broke up certain groups, European groups, and how they gave certain privileges.
Can I be heard?
Go ahead.
I think the female caller is on to something in terms of how other European groups became quote-unquote white. And I think it has something to do with knowing history, but in the sense of power dynamics. For example, when the female caller brought up the Protestants, and she said that has something to do with the rise of the British Empire being expanded and, taking fold all over the world. Then you have World War II, the white-on-white dynamic of fighting between the Jews, European Jews, and non-European Jews. And over time, European Jews became white because, I think, of the dynamics of power, of how what European Jews now are able to control certain sectors of society. So I think the dynamic of power correlates with the rise of certain European groups being incorporated into whiteness, which is the same strategy that the Roman Empire used when using Christianity to expand universalism truth and to have this one idea, this monolithic idea of the European or the Roman Empire as the one, the only, and we must make this world in our self-image.
Yes, I agree with you 100%. Again, Constantine, when he created the whole concept of religion, his whole idea was to do it because he wanted to unify his empire. It's all about power. I agree with you 100%.
What is power, though? I mean, it seems to me like I like the analysis of the analysis like where it's the silly of the European is seeking power. That would mean that if it's seeking power, that means it doesn't have power, because you don't really need to seek out what you don't have. I mean, you don't need to seek out what you do have. So whatever it is that they're missing is what they're looking for, and the just like the fact that they're like a hybrid, they have a hybrid nature, speaks to like the outcomes of all their endeavors, what they're trying to nurture and foster, what it is that they have to do, which is to expand because they can't be satisfied with what they have, so they must move. They must expand beyond their own boundaries to get that which they do not have. It's interesting, like how they must know that they aren't, like human. Yeah. Like they must know that, like on an individual basis, like not absolutely individual basis, but like in general, like they have the show The Flintstones, and then like all the little depictions of Neanderthals. They're always white people with big underbites, and hit the woman and drag her into the cave by the hair, and it's always white people. Like, but it's like they just came out with that like in the last 5 years or 10 years, like where they're like, oh yeah, we're related to Neanderthals. Like they must. And then like I talk to white people in person, I'll hit them with that one, and they'll be like, they didn't know that, but they don't really seem that surprised. It's just I just wonder like how how long must they have known about their nature, as part of their deception, and not like just kind of dressing it all in this kind of like scientific universalism, like, let's all just be gay, and accept Neanderthals and, let the world kind of crumble away to nothing and be toxic and just, it's all cool, it's just life, like, I don't know, washing away the significance.
I don't think they are looking for, like when you say power, like what more could they want? I don't think it's a thing of possession, because I feel like looking at them, they'll never be satisfied no matter how much they have. I think they are longing to be something they are not. And I believe that something is human in I don't know the best ways that we can define it, I guess, as far as the original people, the way they fetishize non-white people, our skin, our hair, our culture. Even watching the movie Avatar, you could just see how they made the Na'vi people like just intrinsically different and more spiritual and connected with the earth and with nature than they are. I think that's something essentially that's missing in them, and I think, I don't know, that could be what drives them to do what they do as well, just wanting to dominate the planet and be those people who were first here. I think it's just something in them that is foreign to this place, just in their very base nature. And I think no matter how much of things they control, they will forever war against everything here and everyone here and work to destroy it. I do think something in them seeks to be what they are not, and that is human.
I don't know about that, but in terms of power, according to YURUGU, it's the need to have power over others. That's very specific in the book itself. And in terms of this, like, underlining core of wanting to be something that non-white people have that white people don't have, if you go back to page 63, I can't help but to read this again. It says, what is unknowable for European causes anxiety. The European psyche needs the illusion of a rationally ordered universe in which everything can be known. Yet Europeans' mythoform creates an unknown and unknowable future whose only relationship to the past and the present is that it determines them and cannot be determined by them. So this like fear, this anxiety that's embedded in them, which causes them to have their utamaraho to be take shape in the form of dominating in this imperialistic way of all people. I think that's the real significance here, not this quote-unquote humanism thing. I mean, I get what you're saying, but their real thrust and drive is the power over others and the unfear of the unknown. The fear of the unknown, like, really, like, spazzes them out. Like, it goes, like, they go berserk. Like, totally berserk.
That's a good point. Cause I kind of like, it's like I guess I kind of dipped into them looking at themselves with the scientific approach. I get kind of tempted into that, but it makes more sense to look at it like that.
In a weird way, it's like the way they're behaving is like they want to emulate what is naturally here, which is the cosmo, unseen force realm here, the spiritual realm. They are trying to emulate that, but in the material, physical sense, since they cannot comprehend the unseen world because it makes them uncomfortable, fearful, and it makes them just seriously spaz out, where they behave in a militaristic point of view at all times, in all areas of life, sectors and activities. I think that's what YURUGU is really, really putting forth here. I'm just fascinated with this book. It just makes things so much clearer. If people really understood the Bible, for example, it's just basically a military science playbook, but it's being taught to people as this spiritual book that you can find solace in your fears or your doubts about yourself and how to heal yourself, No, it's how to pacify yourself to maintain yourself and your family and your loved ones in the system of white supremacy, which is basically Roman Empire imperialism. And the today modern day version of this Roman Empire imperialism application is what we call globalization. It's the same thing, but with a new word.
We're at the 3-hour mark. Victims, male, female victims, enjoyed the dialogue. I hope people are reading. Say again that this is intended to be kind of a book club discussion, not a just sit around and listen to somebody read sections or what have you. If you've been reading, you have questions, tune in. You can ask, you can call in. Folks who have been reading the book should be able to give you some, at least their perspective, their view, to help get some clarity. If you have passages, like I said, it's no way. I don't even intend to read the whole section, just to kind of highlight some of the main points. If you have other portions in the sections that we read that you think are also important, or things that, paragraphs or sections that you think people should think about, dial in. You can share that. Next Friday, same time, 8 p.m. Eastern, 5 p.m. Pacific, doing pages 150 through 210, just 60 pages. Tune in. Hopefully we can get other folks to participate, call in, share their views on the sections that we've read. We will be back tomorrow, the compensatory call-in, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Dr. Kamal Kamban, he'll be on the program on Sunday, 7 p.m. Eastern, 4 p.m. Pacific. Always great to have Dr. Kamban on the broadcast. I was reminded of Key Largo. That's one of Mr. Fuller's favorites, where he, the main white villain, he's brutalizing everybody, shooting up people, killing people, explicit racism, too. They commit all these crimes and then blame it on some so-called Native Americans. And they end up getting killed for all these crimes that white people have committed. Anyway, one of the key points in the film, you all talking about this drive for power. The main white villain in the film, who I believe is Humphrey Bogart, one of the people asks him, he says, what is it that you want? And he finally answers for him, and he says, more. And he says, well, do you think you'll ever have enough? And he says, no, I never have. I guess I never will. And white people, later on in the film, after he's a gangster, that's what he does. He's killing people, shooting up folks, smacking people around. There's a storm, big hurricane comes through, and the main villain, Humphrey Bogart's character, he gets scared. He's running around all anxious and nervous about this storm. And the white guy who is opposed to him, he says, well, why don't you handle it the way that you handle everything else? Shoot it. I think that goes to the caller's point about how white people, they become militaristic with things they don't understand, particularly if it's something spiritual that seems out of their control. First response, kill it, shoot it, beat it. You'll see it play out. The European, Udoma Rojo and Asili, you see it play out beautifully in the film Key Largo. Older film, but a lot of great lessons, and it's pretty entertaining. You should check most of the films Mr. Fuller suggests. Pretty quality. We will be back tomorrow again, Saturday, May 26th, 9 p.m. Eastern, 6 p.m. Pacific. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in to the broadcast. Hope it was a constructive investment of your Friday evening. Be safe as possible and constructive. Replace white supremacy as soon as possible. Anybody want to do the prayer to take us out? Right on. It is time. It is time. It has been time. Thank you, everyone, for tuning into the broadcast. Creator, please give us the ability to understand the information that Dr. Ani placed in YURUGU. I think it is vital for us deactivating the white tip, deactivating the Jesus contamination, and really getting our minds in the correct space to accurately, adequately deal with racist man, racist woman. They have done a lot over generations to confound our ability to accurately understand white people, it can be corrected, and quickly. Please aid our ability to understand this information and to use this information to change our thought, speech, and action, so that the wisdom she shares in this book is reflected in our behavior at all times, in all areas of people activity. Thank you, everybody, for tuning in. We will be back tomorrow evening. Hopefully we'll hear from more folks for the call-in. Cows signing out. Thank you all.